Good morning, Northlake. Hope you're doing well. Just want to let you know I'm praying for you. Prayed for you this morning, and prayed for our church family. Prayed for the families of our churches. Prayed for our kids and our students this morning, and just praying that Lord, will you continue to work in the life of our church, even when we can't gather and in these difficult times. So praying for you, those who are physically sick, and you've sent in your prayer requests to our website. I want to let you know I prayed for you by name today. Prayed for you by name, and our elders and myself our hearts are with you, and we are battling with you and for you um, in prayer. Okay, and so I hope we've been preparing our hearts for Easter. Families, I know that our children's ministry has sent some stuff out, some devotionals for this week. I hope you're doing that as a family. We're doing it in our home as we prepare for Easter. So this morning we go to Mark chapter 14, and today would be Wednesday of the last Wednesday before Jesus, and we find the account in Mark chapter 14. Now, Hollywood would, anytime we see a movie in a the theatrics of the final days of Jesus, you would think that everybody in Jerusalem, every Jewish person, every Israelite, everybody in Israel wanted Jesus killed. That's what we're made to believe. We see these crowds and these mobs saying, "Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him!" But the reality is that's just not the case. In fact, in our gospel account, specifically in the Gospel of Mark, we see that that not everybody did want Jesus killed. But we know that one group specifically did, and that was religious leaders. And there were others, but the religious leaders and those that were connected to the temple, the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, the high priests, the chief priests, they all wanted Jesus killed. And Mark tells us this. In fact, Mark chapter 14, verse 11, the short account of Wednesday, it tells us that they plotted against Jesus to kill him. Now, Mark frames up this passage for us once again, like he typically does, which is he gives us an incident, which is in the very beginning of this passage, that the religious leaders, they needed a traitor, they needed an inside man, they needed an ally to help them plot against Jesus. And then incident B is that we see this story, this beautiful story of this unnamed woman who comes and receives Jesus in her home and then anoints him with a precious, costly oil of alabaster, a jar of alabaster. In fact, it was worth a year's salary. And then following that, we see that the traitor and the ally that the religious leaders needed is provided. That's incident A2, okay? It's provided in the person of Judas. It's the person of Judas. This idea that everybody wanted Jesus killed is not true. In fact, what we see in this passage is contrasting views towards Jesus. Some who wanted him killed, others who worshiped him as King of Kings. If everybody wanted Jesus killed, and it was the general consensus among all of Israel, among all the Jewish people to kill Jesus, then why did they even need a plot? Why did they need to come into the darkness of the garden when Jesus was away from the crowd to apprehend Jesus and arrest him? Why would they need that? Why couldn't they just go up to Jesus right there in the temple courts and arrest him in front of all the people? Well, Mark tells us why, because in Mark chapter 11, verse 18, Mark chapter 12, verse 12, Mark chapter 14, verse 2, it tells us the reason, because the religious leaders and those who wanted Jesus killed, they feared the crowd because the crowd was astonished by Jesus. So we have those who want to kill Jesus, and then we have the contrast that's pictured for us in this narrative of this woman who all she has, her most precious possession, is this jar of alabaster worth a year's salary. And Jesus comes into her home and she anoints Jesus with the entirety of the jar of oil. She shows Jesus her affection, her adoration, her worship. It was customary in that day to anoint people who would come into your home, but typically it was just a dab on the forehead. That's it. She empties the jar of this costly, precious oil. In fact, the disciples and Judas in particular criticize her for this. They criticize her in this passage. But Jesus doesn't do that. In fact, he applauds her. She's unnamed in the book of Mark, but in John chapter 12, she's referred to as Mary of Bethany. Mary of Bethany. So Mary pours out everything she has, her most costly possession, to show honor and worship to Christ. While Judas is motivated by greed at minimum, if not even more, something more sinister, she is motivated by worship. She might have had more faith than the disciples. She might have understood exactly who Jesus was and what Jesus was called to do. In fact, Jesus even said when the disciples criticized her, he turned around and said, what do you mean? Why are you upset? Do you not see what she's done? In fact, he says, but you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand, before burial. It was as if he's saying, hey, she knows what I'm about to do. She knows I'm going to go to the cross. And she's preparing me for it. And you, this little group, you're still trying to figure it out. And so what do we see? We see a woman who is willing to give everything for the sake of Christ. She gives her most prized possession to worship Christ. So as Christ followers today, knowing fully the whole full manifold of the gospel, what Jesus has done for us, should we not be willing to give everything for Christ? Everything. Anything he calls us to give, we should give. Our most costly things that we're willing to give because he is worthy. It's not because of what he's done, primarily. It's just because of who he is. He's Jesus. He's the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. And so any gift we give, he is worthy of. And so as we go throughout this week, consider to yourself, am I giving my best to Christ? My best energy? Am I putting him number one in my finances? Am I placing him at the top of my affections? Does he get all of my attention, my adoration? Because he is worthy of it, church. He is worthy of it. Okay, that's Wednesday. Tomorrow we'll tackle Thursday.